On today's show, Alex Ovechkin says the talk of his retirement is pure nonsense. What's the latest? Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the movement by the Capitals this summer and what can we expect going into the 25-26 season. No big moves, some depth moves, I guess you could say. Do the Capitals have any plans of making any big moves, or could they wait all the way up until the trade deadline? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about Lynden Lakovic, the giant you didn't know that you needed. There was a lot of excitement in this past draft here and a lot of excitement on who the Capitals were going to select. Lynden Lakovic could be an absolute game changer for this Capitals team in years to come. But let's just dive into the meat, the potatoes. Alex Ovechkin, is he or is he not going to retire? You'll have to get back to on him. He's not saying yes. He's not saying no. But you know my stance. If you're an everydayer of the show, you know what is left for him to accomplish or the lack thereof. And in a bit here, I'll talk about all the things that we've heard, that he is going to retire and then retracted. And then Alex Ovechkin's like, hey, not so fast. I didn't say anything. At the end of the day, it is called deductive reasoning. Based on what we've heard, we kind of know what to expect. You know, my whole life growing up as a small child, my parents told me that Santa Claus was a real thing. And as you got older, you heard whispers, you heard murmurs, you heard different things that Santa Claus wasn't real. And you started to question it a little bit. Why do my brother and sister, they still believe that Santa Claus is real? My parents, they say that Santa Claus is real until you just make the connection that, hey, Santa Claus isn't real, but you should have kind of figured that out earlier. In kind of a roundabout way, same thing for Alex Ovechkin. He has not come out and said, hey guys, at the end of the season, I am riding off out into the sunset, but just based on deductive reasoning, based on just observing things, it does seem very apparent to me that this will be his final season in the NHL. Now, at the end of the day, that is my take on it, right? Doing these shows, you have to develop an opinion. I'm not in Alex Ovechkin's head. And is there the possibility that he could change his mind during the season? Absolutely. I mean, as Alex Ovechkin is a guy that seems to live in the right here, right now. But if you're asking me, as I record this in July, what does Dan think about the future of Alex Ovechkin after this year? I think this is his final season in the NHL, and more importantly, his final season as a Capital. So let's dive into that in segment number 1. I've talked about it, but there's always stories that are kind of ping-ponging back and forth. And doing my due diligence, doing this show, right, that you have to address the very latest on most all Capitals players, but more specifically, the captain of the team, Alex Ovechkin. So let's do that. Let's talk about that in segment 1 here. And the biggest name, the big man, the great 8, Alex Ovechkin, says he's not done. That all this talk about his retirement is, quote, pure nonsense, unquote. And again, like I said off the top of the show, he's not going to come out and say this is my final season. I guess there have been players that have said it before, but I don't think the optics of it look good. It looks like he's checked out even before the first game of the 25-26 season. He's just not that kind of guy. And at the end of the day, I think there is the remote possibility that something could happen during the season that could change his mind, right? That, maybe he got a whole lot closer to a certain goal that I'll talk about later in this segment, that he'll want to continue chasing that down. Or maybe he has the perception that this team is gelling and it's, worth one more kick at the can. If I was Alex Ovechkin, I would retire. You've accomplished the things you want to retire. You caught past Gretzky. You won a Stanley Cup. What is there left to reach for here? But the talk of it and him saying it's all pure nonsense, but is it really? Let's walk through this, Caps fans. If you are skeptical of my mindset, or how does Dan draw this conclusion? It started with a marketing email back in May. You guys remember that one that called next season Ovi's Last Dance? And that wasn't some random typo. That email had to pass through 4 departments. And then quickly, the Capitals PR department had to reel that one in real quick and say, nothing to see here, guys. That was just a mistake. Yeah, it was a mistake. Then we had the interview with Nastya, Ovechkin's wife, where she very casually mentioned they might return to Russia after his contract ends. Now, Ovi says the media twisted her words, but come on, that doesn't come out of nowhere. I think that Alex Ovechkin wants to retire, but he doesn't want to come out and say it. I think that maybe, again, I don't know his wife at all, but maybe his wife wants him to retire. And it kind of just slipped out, right? But I don't think that she would have said that had Alex Ovechkin not talked about it. And here's where I'm at it. He's not saying he's retiring, but he's also not ruling it out. Every quote has been just as vague and ambiguous about keeping that door open. He said, quote, anything can happen. We'll fight game by game, and I'm not looking that far ahead, unquote. So, just draw your own conclusions there. Take a look at the mail that was sent out. Take a look at the comments by his wife, and just take a look at the biggest thing. He's going to be 40 years old in September. What is there left for him to accomplish? Is he going to go full on Tom Brady and go, I want to come back one more season so I can win a Stanley Cup, just like Brady came back to try to win another Super Bowl? The odds are stacked against you. That's not a guy. Like I said, those comments, those quotes, that is not coming from a guy with a plan for 3 more years. That's a guy figuring it out. And, you take a look at it. Say he signs, a 1, 2, 3-year deal. Is he going to be playing NHL hockey at 43? And people are like, yeah, have you ever heard of that guy called Jaromir Jagr? Yeah, not playing some of his best hockey right now. And I don't think that Ovechkin, is a whole lot like Jaromir Jagr. People always like to point to the 0.01%, right, of these guys that played when they're 50 years old. And I understand 40 is not 50. But I don't think there is a tremendous amount for him to play for. But I know what you're going to say. Dan, he just passed and scored a bunch of goals this year. He scored 44 goals. He passed Gretzky. He's still elite. And I've never doubted his game. Never have. He got off to that slow start a couple seasons ago to start off the season. And I thought, is there something wrong with him? But I never doubted that he would be able to find his way. And he is elite. Absolutely. He had an incredible year, even with a broken leg. If you think about it, that he very well would have broke that whole Gretzky record earlier had he not broke it. But that might be the part of the reason he hangs them up too. He finally got the record, the moment, the goal, number 895. He passed Wayne. Mission accomplished. He won a Stanley Cup in 2018. He did what we thought might never be done. He became the greatest goal scorer in NHL history, and he did it in a Capitals sweater. So you think about it. And for the people out there that are like, hey, man, I mean, he could still keep playing. What's in it for him? I mean, do you think he's playing for you personally? What kind of goals does he have left? Well, there is one that kind of pops out. You could argue, well, maybe the combined playoff plus regular season record. That's something. Gretzky's got 1,016. Ovi's at 974. There's a chance that he could chase that down. Is he wired that way to try to chase down every record there is out there? Sure, it's possible. Do I think that Alex Ovechkin is wired that way? I really don't think so. But when asked about it at the charity game last week, he said, quote, "I'm not looking that far ahead," unquote. And again, there's a lot of things that could transpire during the season that could change his opinion, but I'm not so sure. And, just those comments, "I'm not looking that far ahead," doesn't sound like a guy that someone that's chasing after another mountain, another milestone. It sounds like a guy who's satisfied. Just let me play my last season in peace. I've heard for the last several seasons about Gretzky and when are you going to catch Gretzky, that he hasn't had a lot of peace of mind as of late. And, if you don't believe it, his wife even talked about that after he caught and passed Gretzky, that you guys don't know the behind the scenes stuff, that it weighed heavy on him, that was he going to be able to do it? And all the media scrutiny, when was it going to be possible? It became so intense that he just started deflecting, saying, "I don't even care about it anymore. I just want to win another cup." We know that wasn't true. So let's not try to make goals. Let's not try to make markers for Alex Ovechkin. Just let him play out his career on a high note. And look, he's 39. He's heading into the final year of a lengthy contract. And it's been a grind. The injuries that he sustained over his career are piling up. And to be clear here, the roster is changing. And, I've spoke about that on the show. If you're an everydayer, the youth movement on this team, that this could very well be one last hurrah with a grade 8 on this team. And I wouldn't be against this team trying to put together a truly next level team to give him the opportunity of winning another cup. I mean, why not, right? But this team is changing. And you saw Backstrom, you saw Oshie, Kuznetsov no longer on this team, that the old team, the good old boys, the young guns of yesteryear are peeling off slowly here. And now the team's not rebuilding, but it's definitely transitioning. And Ovi's legacy is secure. Nothing will ever take that away from him. If he walks away after this season, he is a legend regardless. And that's the big thing to take away from this, that he has done the things that he wants to do. So, yeah, maybe he says anything can happen. But if we're being real here, this feels like a goodbye tour, even if he won't call it that yet. So do I think that he's going to say it during the season? Maybe in the latter part of the season. I think there's the possibility, but I also think there's the distinct possibility that he waits until the end of the season is over and then he says it. Like I say, there is not a lot of things for him to play for, in my estimation. And I think that he has checked off a lot of different things in his mind on what he wants to do. The biggest of which is the Gretzky thing and winning a Stanley Cup and everything else that is on his mantle from a truly amazing career that at the end of the day, let's try to, push our wishes onto him. Let's just be happy he was here. And let's hope that this Capitals team just blows it up in his final year under contract. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Lynden Lakovic, a name that maybe wasn't too familiar to a lot of different Capitals fans before the draft. But when you take a look at the back of his hockey card at a younger level, it is next level changer for the Capitals. I'll discuss straight ahead. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already getting the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast way to pay out, and makes every regular season game feel like a must watch events. So maybe you're a fan of the Nationals or the Orioles, but maybe you want vested interest in all of the games. Open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. So, are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit fanduel.com to get started. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking Lynden Lakovic. And just a huge guy, a prototypical Capital, selected 27th overall in the first round, and a big, tall player that I think is going to fit the bill for the Capitals in years to come. Now, the hard part about it for me is that, especially these players later in the first round, it's kind of a given that they're not going to be NHL ready. And to be clear here, some of the players on let's say the top 10 of the first round might not be NHL ready. And even if they make the team, sometimes it's not a smooth transition. Sometimes there's a little bit of work. We saw that with Connor Bedard, that it wasn't just shooting straight to the moon. I guess it all depends on what kind of team you're playing on, right? Or Macklin Celebrini, for example. But when you take a look at Lynden Lakovic, he is very honest about his game. And that's one of the things I like. I think that years ago, when players were asked about, what they need to work on and what their, estimated time of arrival is in the NHL, they always gave an answer that I think they thought that everyone wanted to hear. Like, I'm a great player in every aspect, and I'm guilty of not trying hard enough, and I plan on being NHL ready next season. But these players, they know, and maybe they've been coached. I guess, I don't know. It seems like these young players are very mature, and, in these press conferences, they know how to give some good answers. I think back to when I was 18 years old or, a young man, I would not have been able to give those kind of answers, but, just very mature. And, again, his game isn't perfect. And I think that's the biggest thing why he's not going to be able to join the team next season. A young guy at the end of the day as well. He says he wants to add strength, get more physical, grow his 200-foot game. And, you take a look at the game that you play at the lower levels in college or in juniors, it's still hockey, but it's not the same. And I think that you saw that to a certain extent with Ryan Leonard when the Capitals, he joined the Capitals in the latter part of the season that, I had hopes. And I think a lot of Capitals fans had hopes that he was just going to just shoot straight to the top. It wasn't that way, but we saw some good breakaways. We saw some good out of Ryan Leonard, and I expect him to grow by leaps and bounds. That I think that you can put Lynden Lakovic in that category as well. But working on that 200-foot game, said it himself, you need to play on both sides of the puck to stay in the NHL. He gets it. And Andrew Crystal, he was that way as well, that these young guys are very tuned in. And I think that they watch a lot of hockey, right? I think that they know, I think that when you play hockey, your capabilities, I'm better than this player, or maybe my game is not as good as this player. And what are some of the things that I need to work on? Lynden Lakovic is a big guy, maybe could fill out a little bit more, kind of like Tom Wilson. You think back to when he first joined the league, he's, was that bigger frame as well, but kind of grew into it. You got to think maybe a change in diet, hitting the gym harder, put on the weight. And I'm not trying to say that, I think that Lynden Lakovic, just based on size, is going to be, Tom Wilson 2.0. But if he could, grow into that frame a little bit more and bulk up, that he could definitely use that frame to its advantage. Think Pierre-Luc Dubois, Alexei Protas, these kind of guys that are big. Ilya as well, another big guy. So when I say prototypical, I guess that is what I'm talking about here. But when we talk about his contract, it's one of those kind of like a slide deal. So unless he plays 10 NHL games, the clock won't start. We're expecting him to be back in Moose Jaw for one more year. And then question mark, right? I mean, I guess we don't know. How is he going to progress in the season that is to come for Moose Jaw. I think that if he takes big steps forward, I think that being that the Capitals are leaning into being a younger team, that there's the distinct possibility that in maybe a couple, few years, maybe sooner, that he could be a difference maker and part of the next wave of the Capitals. But like I said, pick number 27th overall, and all things considered, I like it. And I like it on a little different things. I knew the name, wasn't super familiar, but once I got to know him, I really liked the player. But the thing I like about it is that Ross Mahoney was in it on him. Chris Patrick was in on it. And Ross Mahoney, as far as the draft, of course, holds a little bit more weight for me, as he has been the mastermind of the Capitals at the draft for years. So if he was excited, if he was worried about him not being available, I'm going to go ahead and put my eggs in the basket of Lynden Lakovic and say, Ross Mahoney has not led me astray yet. Now, the Capitals called his name on draft night, and it'll be real. It was. I was excited as I saw the players that were left, that were available, and I started thinking to myself, okay, that player's gone to this team, that player's gone to that team. Who's left? And which players would the Capitals select? I looked at the board, and his name was there. Looked into him, and huge. And what did we see at development camp? Big time. Wow, the kid is huge. Like I said, 6'4", and that's saying something. Chris Patrick was talking about how big he is, and he's 6'5". Said Lakovic stood eye to eye with him. He even joked the combine might have got it wrong, and honestly, they may have. Bigger than I expected, taller than I expected. Really impressed by him, Chris Patrick said. Now, we're talking about the NHL here. We're not talking about the NBA, but size is still a thing. And you can use it to your advantage. Nice stride, long legs, using your body to its advantage. You see that in Protas, for example, that, a good skater and he's not easy. He's not easily driven off the puck. And I think that is a lot that I like about his game. But all things considered, the very fact that he was available at 27th overall is a steal. And, when you start to look in, and is what I did on draft night, is when I was looking at the players that were available, and I saw, what kind of player he was. Moose Jaw had a rough season, and he was big. Veterans traded, and a lot of teams, that they played, hard games against. But Ross Mahoney, assistant GM, runs the draft table, and he saw it differently. One of the things that he said about him, quote, is they made him captain after trading those vets. He had to lead, unquote. So leadership qualities, the big frame, the great shot, the great skater. I think that he checked off a lot of boxes for the Capitals. And like I said, a team that is leaning into the youth for, I'm going to say the first time in many, many years that, it has been kind of that, rock the red era for years, and it kind of was started, that way when Alex Ovechkin joined the team, that, there was the core after that. It was Backstrom and these kind of players, that it was kind of that nucleus for quite a few years. I know some players were added and subtracted, but, big picture there, I think that that is going to be a big thing for the Capitals for this season, at least to kick at the can, to see what this youth has. We've heard for the longest time that Leonard, Miro, Crystal, these kind of guys, Cole Hudson, they're going to be game changers. Now, they're not all going to be joining the Capitals. There still are a lot of great veterans on this team, as I'm sure you're well aware. But I think we're starting to see this team lean into that youth. I get a lot of questions on Twitter, X, all the time saying, where are all these veterans that you said might be here? Again, the Capitals were all in on these players. They did the things they needed to do. It didn't work out. I think the Capitals are now pivoting into more of a younger direction. Don't necessarily think that was the game plan, but it is where they're at right now. And as I'll talk about in segment 3, things could still change. But at the end of the day, you take a look at Lakovic, he could very well be a part of the next wave, if not the immediate next wave, the wave after that, if you will, that this team is going to be truly loaded for bear for years to come. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Capitals off-season so far. Is there any fireworks? Does Chris Patrick have anything up his sleeve? I'll discuss next. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast, easy? Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you find reach the right candidates faster. Now, I am involved in the HR to an aspect at my work. I'm involved in the hiring, the firing, and sometimes it's frustrating. People bringing in paper applications, and I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be an easier way. There is an easier way with Indeed, and now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on the Locked On Capitals podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment of the show here, we're talking about the Capitals' moves and the lack thereof, I guess you could say, this offseason. Listen, I was totally excited that the Capitals were going to acquire fill-in-the-blank big-name player. Just didn't happen. Nikolai Ehlers was the most recent player to let me down. And I think to a certain extent let Chris Patrick and the Capitals down. But being who they are, GMs of the team, you can't sulk. You can't, put all your eggs in the basket of one player. And then when it doesn't work, just like, oh my God, what happened? They're pivoting, right? And I think the Capitals their radar's still turned on, spin, looking for a free agent, looking for, a trade, something of that nature, spin, looking for something on the radar. And they have done some of that. Declan Chisholm, Justin Sordiff, and also some players to plug some holes in Hershey that ostensibly could help this team if needed, right? But I think it's going to be different for the Capitals this season. I really think, like I said in the second segment, that the Capitals are going to lean into that youth movement. And I'll touch on here in a moment what will happen if, that doesn't work. But let's kind of, recount what has happened this offseason. And to be clear here, the Capitals have, made some quietly sneaky moves, some good moves, I think. Martin Feravari locked up long-term. Loving it. Declan Chisholm, I think that is a good move as well. Anthony Beauvillier, that's that pivot I'm talking about when Ehlers didn't work. Signed Hendrix LaPierre and Justin Sordiff as well. Again, those are the bigger-ish, relatively speaking, moves that took place this summer. Now, that's a lot of work to be done on the blue line in the middle six, and GM Chris Patrick said exactly that. He said, quote, "We addressed our defensive depth, which was a concern." What was that concern? Of course, is that when Marty Feravari got injured in the playoffs, they reached into the cupboard. They did nothing, at the trade deadline to address it. They thought, we got Alexiev and Dylan McElrath. We're good. Not so good. So now who did they lose? One of those players was Alex Alexiev. Yeah, just wasn't working. I'm okay with that. Taylor Radish, meh, not great, not horrible, kind of the mushy middle, if you will. Andrew Mangiapane, another player maybe a little bit better than Taylor Radish as far as I'm concerned. And Lars Eller, listen, I have a hard time saying anything bad about Eller for just based on his long time with the team, but it just didn't work. Or I think maybe not working isn't the right way of saying it. I think the Capitals are going to pursue at least perceived better options. And like I say, Nikolai Ehlers, Jack Roslovic, there's different players that they've sniffed around on, maybe a little bit more than others. But I think that, when it came to Jack Roslovic, for example, I think they thought to themselves, there's some upside there, but do we have just as good, if not a better option internally? You don't always have to go outside of the organization to get a player when you might very well have a player that's, as good, if not better. That would have been the home run move, right? Though Nikolai Ehlers, I think that, I'm going to be honest, I was let down. I would have plugged a big hole, but instead the Caps are betting on chemistry, internal growth, and cap space. And Patrick said it straight up. He said there's always players available at the deadline. Think about that one here. If we're in a spot to use the space, we'll be aggressive. So let's see where this team goes if they are on the cusp of doing great things, like, hey, we're headed for the playoffs, but we're missing, a forward or a defender or whatever the case might be. We don't know what is going to be thrown the Capitals' direction this year, that they very well could go out and see what the options are at the trade deadline in the spring, right? So what does that tell me? The front office is playing it smart, not going all in, not bottoming out either. They're not just, they're not trying to sink the ship to get the number one overall pick. That's not the case. They're giving the kids a chance. I think that letting Lapierre get another shot, sign that bridge deal. I'm for it. And, I'm a little skeptical, but it's not the first time I've been wrong. Miroshnichenko, who's flashed, I think is definitely due for, more. I don't know if if it's going to pan out. And, you take a look at Sortov and Declan Chisholm, these kind of guys as well, that it's going to be interesting when you kind of throw them all in a pot there. What is going to be the cream that rises to the top? Stable goalie tandem, no real concerns there. LT, Charlie Lindgren, Clay Stevenson, 1, 2, and 3, and, even greater good options underneath that as well. So say Clay Stevenson is injured or, isn't what we had hoped. There is plenty of options between the pipes. And like I said, one more year, we know for sure of the grade 8. Is it a cup team? Are they taking steps forward this year? Are they taking steps back? A bit ambiguous. I guess we don't know, right? I think that some players moved. So, quite a few players moved out. And, the players that they plugged in and leaning into this youth movement is a bit of a question mark. I am going to try to lead with a positive foot, as I think that is the right way to do things. If you lead with a negative foot all the time, then negative things are going to happen. And it's just not a healthy way to live your life. So I think that it is the right time to lean into the youth and see what they have in the tank. But big picture, 30,000 foot view as I look over, the loose sketch, the etch-a-sketch of the 25-26 season, I think we'll see. I think that there's young players that on paper should definitely lift this team up. I know that there's Wilson, Connor McMichael, Protas, PLD, these kind of guys that put up career best numbers that, it's not like there's big pieces that left town. I'm talking Radish. I'm talking Mangiapane. I hate to, say disparaging things about him, but I'm not really bummed out about any of those players leaving. That the nucleus, the core of this team is still intact. So I feel confident. I just have a bit of question marks as to how well these young players play, initially, and what kind of moves will they pivot to if, in fact, they're not as good as perceived. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.